Okay, so today we're going to start talking about mollusks. Mollusks are part of the kingdom Animalia, and they are a phyla within that kingdom under the classification of invertebrate. So what characterizes a mollusk? So as we can see here, a mollusk has a soft little body. They usually will have a protective shell to help protect them. This is a snail. Their soft body is there, but they are coelomates, which means they have a three-part body plan. As we've already discussed in a previous video, that means they have a mesoderm, an endoderm, and an ectoderm. And so mollusks are bilateral, so they're higher up on that evolutionary totem pole over, say, sponges, which have a asymmetrical body symmetry, and then radial symmetry would be our cnidarian. Now we go into mollusks. They're bilateral. They also will always have a shell. The shell is just kind of to protect them. They don't develop an exoskeleton, so they use a shell in that case. Their body cavity does have a true coelom, which means it does have a true body cavity with internal compartmentalized organs. And so these will fold over themselves. They're able to move past each other because they're filled with an empty space and allow for lubrication. Most mollusks have a coelom is only a small area around the heart. And this heart sac in us is called a pericardium. And this pericardium sac allows the heart to beat without causing frictional forces acting on the lungs and the surrounding areas. So if we look here, this is the body plan of a mollusk. So a mollusk will make up a three-part body plan. One, it will have a vascular mass. It will also have a mantle and a foot. And so if we look here, this whole purple area right down at the bottom, this would be our foot. This visceral mass is located right here. It's the pink area, and then this purple, dark purple area is the mantle. Notice the mantle is the smallest. The visceral mass is where we have most of our organs, well, all of our organs really. And that, if we look, it has a mouth and it has an anus. Yay! So the food goes in one area and out another. It does have a stomach that will break down stuff and an intestinal tract that will help to disperse those nutrients. There it has our gonads. This would be our brain, if we want to call it that. It does have a heart. Notice the heart is not as complex as us. They still have gills instead of lungs because they're able to do air transfer. So if you notice, mollusks always are wet, like snails kind of are slimy and wet. They have to have that mucus there for air exchange. They will also see that we have a nice hard shell over top of it. The radial these are like hair-like structures. This is, they don't have teeth. So this would be what they act as teeth to kind of help move food through or put it into the body. And so we also will have, if you notice, we have nerves. We have an esophagus. These nerve cords are little like our nerves that would go into our feet and sense what we're moving on. The mantle is outside the visceral mass, which is a heavy fold of tissue creating an outside layering. We would consider the skin on us. The foot, which is primarily used for locomotion or movement. There are a few mollusks that the head and foot are combined into one structure, but a lot of mollusks, they're separate. So feeding's really cool. So this is an electron microscope view of what a mollusk mouth looks like. So these radial that we said, they don't have teeth, that they have these radials that kind of go around. So we do have some that are filter feeders, but most are slow-moving herbivores, while others are very active predators. So mollusks can be bivalves, can also have radial. So these are hundreds of thousands of pointed backward teeth curving into rows, usually of groups of 3 to 5. The mollusk will push them through the mouth, and they'll actually like scrape off food or remove it from a surface or break off parts of plants. And then the food is digested in the stomach and then passed to the intestinal tract. And through the intestinal tract, it will then go to the anus. Notice they have a mouth and an anus. Yay! Wonder it. Excretion for a mollusk. So the mollusk does have a true coelom, so it can collect waste and latent body fluids. It is beaten or pushed past into the ceiling through tiny tubes called nephrida. These recover useful materials such as sugar, salt, and water from the fluids that is passed through, and they're reabsorbed back into the body, kind of like our large intestine reabsorbs water back into our body. The remaining material removes through waste, through openings in the mantle. We call this an anus. It will push this waste out into the surrounding area. If it is an herbivore or a plant-eating mollusk, their actual waste turns into soil and is really actually nutrient-rich. The circulation or circulatory system of a mollusk. Mollusk circulatory systems carry blood and nutrients and oxygen to all the tissues and then remove them. They have a 3-chambered heart, which is much different than ours. We have a 4-chambered heart. And they have an open circulatory system. An open circulatory system means the blood will drain back to the heart and then is pushed out. There is some overlap in this, which means they don't necessarily have they can't maintain a really large body size when they have an open circulatory system, because you have to diffuse that blood and it can only force it out so far because there are no considered true arteries and veins in this. You'll just have a blood-filled space. The exception to that is an octopus. They have a relatively exceptionally amazing closed circulatory system. They're much, much larger in size and much more dynamic. They are like the top of the evolutionary chain for mollusks. They're extremely intelligent as well. Remember, in a closed circulatory system, they still have a 3-chambered heart, but the blood stays within the arteries, to the capillaries, then to the veins, and then back to the heart. And so it'll circulate within to those 3 positions. So respiration for most mollusks require gills, which are located within the mantle. The gills are like gills in fish. They are going to extract oxygen that is dissolved in water as water passes over them. There are some sea snails and slugs that do lack gills, and they're able to do air exchange directly through their skin. Again, they have to have that mucus. Land or terrestrial snails have to have a mucus membrane or be near that water because they still have to do gas exchange either through their skin or by use of gills. Terrestrial snails are more active at night than during the day. Well, that makes sense because it's cooler at night than it is during the day, and there's more moisture. Dry weather snails do pull, when the weather becomes dry, they'll actually pull back into their shell and create a mucus plug or wad that will close up the opening. And then when they're done with that dry season, then they'll remove that plug and they can go back to life as normal. The rest of them have to live within water because you have to have this water, dissolved oxygen within water for them to breathe. And it's really important for that. Most mollusks are able to reproduce through sexual reproduction. So most mollusks are either male or female, which is different than other species before this because they could be hermaphroditic. Some are, but most will stay either male or female. They can't go back and forth in between those. Fertilization of egg occurs externally, not internally. Most aquatic mollusks and for most aquatic mollusks. So most being usually, but we do have some exceptions. However, terrestrial mollusks will have an internal fertilization. Octopus are the exception to the aquatic mollusks. They are extremely complex organisms. They're smart. They have higher level thinking processes. They go through a reproduction that is internal. They take care of their offspring until they die. In fact, some of them will, an octopus will actually lay its eggs within a cave, and then it sits there and moves water with its tentacles back and forth over top of these until the babies are born. And some of them will stay within their cave for months doing this, and without leaving, the mother will actually die of starvation to make sure that her hundreds of babies live. So that's pretty intense when you think about that. But let's talk about these little eggs here. So these fertilized eggs of most mollusks will develop into a type of larvae called a trocheopore, and we have a picture of that right here. Many marine species can move from place to place. Remember, this trocheopore is going to drift within the ocean currents. It also is free swimming. It has little flagellae and cilia that will help it move. These cilia are right here. So it allows for it to move. And remember, we want to go away from the mother. We're trying to get out of there because we don't want to have competition. The larvae stage of mollusks, octopus, squid, and freshwater snails occur in an egg, and then the juvenile mollusks will hatch out of that egg and develop from there. So there are 7 classes that make up the phyla Mollusca or Mollusca. These are 3 major categories of Gastropoda, which are our snails and slug, our Cephalopoda, which are octopus and squid, and our Bivalves, which are clams, oysters, and scallops. All have the same basic systems for tissue layering, for feeding, for body plan. They're all kind of the same within those categories. And so there is an extreme diversity between Gastropoda and Cephalopoda and Bivalva. They're extremely different, such as you wouldn't think of an oyster and a squid being in the same phyla, but they are. We also have some that are very abundant in freshwater and marine water, while others are terrestrial. So let's start talking about Gastropoda. These are our snails and slugs. They're primarily a marine group, and then we also have members that are freshwater and terrestrial as well. So they can range in size from microscopic to 1 meter in length, which is huge. Most will have a pair of tentacles, and you can see the tentacles right here. These are sensory organs on their head. They have little eyes, and you can see the eye here located on the tip. And sorry, this is one, and then there's one coming off this way, but you can't really see it. All you see is the little tip right there. And then they will have, this is the foot here, and then we'll have our mantle right underneath of this hard shell. They can react to things when they feel threatened and actually go right back into that shell or crunch up. And so they have to be, again, in water for gas exchange. So their locomotion is through that foot that we just saw. The terrestrial species will still have a foot, but it secretes a mucus in which that foot allows for it to glide across surfaces. That's why we have that like sticky mucusy thing when you have snails in your garden. The foot, again, is some type of modified flap that will allow for swimming or crawling, depending on if it's aquatic or terrestrial. So the feeding habits of these guys are typically herbivores. They'll scrape algae off of rocks. We like to have them in our fish tanks. Most people have snails in there to kind of clean that up. Then we have terrestrial snails. They can actually be a big problem. Some terrestrial snails, such as the snails that they have in Florida, which are an invasive species from Africa, they can grow to like the size of a grapefruit, and they can live underground. They have a putrid smell, and they eat vegetation like crazy. So they can be a problem if they would invade a garden, or they can overpopulate because they can reproduce pretty quickly, and you can have a female that can reproduce multiple times within a year. Sea slugs and many others are active predators. Yay! Slugs are predators. The cone snail is a really cool one. It has a modified area, remember the teeth or the mouth portion, that acts as kind of like a poison tip or harpoon, and it shoots it into this prey, and then the prey becomes paralyzed. And then while the prey is still alive and paralyzed there and still knows what's going on, it's eaten. That's crazy, but kind of cool still. Then we have cephalopods. This is our squid, octopus, cuttlefish, and naturals. These are what we are considered our higher level for this phyla. Their body masses, they have very large heads attached to tentacles and foots. Their foot is divided into basically what we consider their foot, and then our tentacle part here. They'll usually have some type of suction cup. Most have an external shell, with the exception of Naturalis. These tentacles are unique because of the suction cups, and squid have 10 tentacles, octopus have 8, and talus have 80 to 90, and that's what we have pictured here. And so with the cephalopods, they have a brain and sensory organs. They are extremely intelligent. In fact, octopus are the most intelligent invertebrates that we have on the planet right now. They have complex nervous systems, including that well-developed brain. They're capable of learning. And we know that they have eyes that actually have vision, and some species have color vision. They have a siphon, which is a place where they're able to draw water into the cavity, and then they can expel it out, propelling them or giving them jet-like motion. Squid and octopus do this as well. Squid and octopus also through this little tube can release not only water to jet propulsion, but a dark fluid, which is an ink. And this creates a cloud which can conceal the way that they escape. So they use it as a defense mechanism to escape a predator. They don't actually spray it and then attack. They usually spray it and then run away. And then we have our bivalves. Bivalves are really kind of cool. These would be our clams. They have a hinged shell at the umbrum, and then they have ligaments that will hold them together. They do not have a distinct head region or radial region as other mollusks do. They're typically flat and have 2 shells. They have 2 thick muscles, one here and one here, that connect these valves. And when the muscles contract, the valves are closed, and when they relax, they can open. And they can open and close these valves. They do have a posterior or rear end. This would be our backside, and an anterior end, which would be the front side of them. One thing that's really cool about these, they are filter feeders. Some do have a muscular foot that can dig down into the sand, which can allow for them to move. The cilia on the bivalve's gills draw water in through the siphons, and then the siphon tube is allowed to push water over the gills. The gills can then pull out the oxygen out of the water along with the nutrients that they need. And so that is able to pick out not only oxygen, but food particles as it moves along the cilia. So again, a true filter feeder. One thing that's kind of cool about bivalves is they're able to produce something called a pearl. Pearls are naturally occurring. It is a defense mechanism for the mollusk to protect themselves. The nacre is a hard, shiny substance that is secreted over the foreign object to give this layering effect so that it's actually protecting the clam from the foreign object. We call that encapsulation when it happens within us, and we will encapsulate foreign material as well, and you can feel it as a hard lump that will develop under your skin. This mother of pearl that forms over this foreign object has been considered extremely valuable. And so you can actually create, if you have a clam at home, you can put a piece of sand, a piece of rock, some type of foreign object in there, and it will create a pearl from that. It does take time. It's not something that's going to happen in 24 hours. And that is the end of mollusks.